It's really interesting to find out that your brain is more or less not necessarily broken, but has been internalizing things for the wrong way for a good long while. I basically realized I've been taking more comfort in discomfort than I have been in my normal waking life, to the point where I don't really know how to handle having a normal, comfortable living situation. I need to constantly worry or else I don't feel right. So now I'm re examining my situation, my life, in the way that I've been for as long as I can remember, and realizing that the entire time I've lived, I've been trying to hide not only from everyone else, but from myself. Life, as I know it, has always been something that I've been trying to hide from rather than be part of. And I'm slowly trying to make the transition from point A to point B, where I can slowly start opening back up, not only to the world, but to myself, because I still fear who I am. I'm afraid because I fear that who I am will drive people away, which would be a normally irrational fear, but it seems quite coincidental in that it seems to always happen. But it is actually just a series of unfortunate events, as it were, where I am not responsible for the way that people act, and I've been largely surrounded by a lot of people who have very specific tendencies of mind, and I am one of them, I guess, where you have to understand that there is a very specific subset of interfunctionality that people are able to incorporate into being. There is a certain nothingness to everything, where everyone, the absolutes are obviously two sides of the same coin, and reality is somewhere in between. Such things as the definition of perfection only exist to show that thing cannot exist. But then, if there is such a thing as perfection, then what is the opposite? If imperfection is the opposite, then what is humanity? Humans are neither not perfect, obviously, but imperfect is quite too simple of a thing to say. And, well, there has to be some sort of gray area in between those two. Poles don't necessarily exist for their own sake. For example, North and South poles exist because one exists, therefore the other must exist. And if the other didn't exist, then the primary one would simply either become redefined or cease to exist altogether. So where do we stand? I'm currently in the process of working towards a transition. I've been trying to transition towards being a more reasonable person so that I can more appropriately help reality, so that I can more properly integrate my being into society, so that I may more reasonably become the person that I am meant to be, instead of being my own limiting factor. I have been a limiting factor in others' lives because they have grown to rely on a me that is an unreliable me because it only existed out of necessity rather than it being who I truly am. And it gets tiresome being somebody who you're not for an extended period of time. I don't know if you've ever done this, but if you haven't, believe me, it's exhausting. So, who am I? That's a problem, isn't it? I'm trying to figure out who I am as I'm going through the motions of existence and trying to see what fits and what doesn't fit who I am, who I was, who I will be. And honestly, ultimately, lots of it ends up being inconsequential. Your past only exists insofar as it's meant to influence your future in keeping you from making the mistakes that you made in the past. But there are also things that you can end up fooling yourself into thinking that you could avoid a situation that you had no impact over. Say there were an unforeseen circumstance that was a very formative thing in your life, and you were too young to fully integrate that. That's something that you will end up being working with for the remainder of your life, in all likelihood. And it'll end up being something that eats away at you slowly. And if you don't fully acknowledge and deal with it, then you will end up trying to say, oh, well, I'll take this little part of change and call it good. You have to incorporate it fully. Each part of your being exists for a very specific reason, and I have been attempting to summarily reject each and every one of them individually and then reinitiate them into my being. So now I'm standing at this weird point where I have known myself so much and yet still don't know who I am, because I still fear the true being that is me, because I feel that when I am at my me-ist, it will drive people away. And I have had, luckily, incredibly fortunate friends and incredibly fortunate luck in finding these friends who have dug in their heels and done for me what I had originally tried to do for them, which is to help them to more fully integrate themselves into themselves. If I did not have these friends, I would have probably become a very different person. Then again, I also wouldn't have relied on people, so I may have either encountered this answer sooner, as it were, or have become an even worse person exponentially faster. There was a good long while there where I was a very dangerous individual, and I guess you could still consider me one, but to a lesser extent, in that I am dangerous, but only insofar as you come between me and something that I deeply care about. And the things that I deeply care about are my friends and family. So, what am I? I am something that desires to protect the things that I care for. Well, I think everybody is that, isn't they? Aren't they? Well, perhaps, perhaps not. Depends on what you define as care. It depends on what. A lot of things. But I guess that would be a simple enough central premise for most people to be able to understand. If you don't care about things, what are you? Schizophrenic and or sociopathic, typically. And you are functionally different from the rest of humanity, but you're also the same, because we couldn't exist without you, and vice versa. We wouldn't know that you exist if we didn't exist, etc. Definitionally speaking, you have to exist because we do. There will always be an outlier as long as there is a mean, because otherwise there would be no variance. And life is varied and therefore can never not be varied. It's really funny. It's basically math when you think about it. Math is input-output, and people struggle with it to the extent that they don't really understand what it is. But what it is finding an answer, and it's always the same way that you get to that answer, which is probably why it boggles people's minds. It's because reality as it stands is something that is always changing, but math hasn't changed for thousands of years. And yet it's still something that is incredibly difficult for some to grasp. And then those people, if they actually manage to fully integrate it into themselves, end up becoming the strongest proponents for said thing. Because if you're able to successfully fight your way through something and master it, you will be much stronger for it, rather than someone who just takes to it and doesn't really have any true appreciation for what it is. I appreciate the things that I have because I've had to fight for them. And I had to fight for them because I set myself up that way. And I hope to continue to strive for betterment in the future.